Greetings, good afternoon. How y'all doing? My name is Tanda Cesar Shamaringa, and welcome to Root Work. Lord have mercy, I'm tired. Welcome to Root Work here on Black Liberation Media. I'm seeing y'all 2 days in a row, might be three in a row. I might need to slow down before I start doing something. Black Liberation Media here on YouTube. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Like, share, and subscribe. That is how you can practically support the channel, practically support the platform. Like this video, share the link, subscribe to Rootwork, subscribe to Black Liberation Media. In addition to hitting up that Patreon, that Rootwork, and that Cash App, all that information is scrolling on the screen below. So yesterday we talked about the jaw tall. We talked about sinners. Today we're going to be speaking with Eileen. Arlene. I'm tired, y'all. Y'all got to forgive a sister. Arlene Eisen. How she right there looking at me. How could I mess her name up? We're going to be talking with Arlene Eisen, who is a long time revolutionary anti-imperialist activist and organizer and researcher and writer. Her newest book is called In the Worldwide Family of Militant Women. It is a memoir social history put out by Iskra Books. She is, in addition to a long time activist and struggler, if you're not familiar with her work with anti-imperialist struggles, you might be familiar with the work of her sons, Biko Eisen Martin and Tongo Eisen Martin, revolutionary cultural workers coming out of the Bay Area of California and pretty much worldwide at this point. But yeah, this is somebody who's been doing this work for a long time and was finally pushed, shoved, almost kicking and screaming to write down her personal stories, her memories, and put them in a book. And now you have access to that also. Welcome, Arlene Eisen. Thank you so much for being on Rootwork today.
Thank you. And I have to say, this is the first podcast I've done since I actually have the book to show on screen in
Right,
three
right,
dimensions. So thank
right.
you very much. It's wonderful to see you there.
Yeah, it's wonderful to see the book in print. That's a good thick book, and that's probably not even half of it, is it?
Well, it's 20 years.
It's
It covers 20 years.
it only covers 20 years worth. Well,
1962 to 82.
wow.
Important years.
Those are absolutely important years.
Yeah.
And 82 through now are important also. I guess we got
They're
you got to
all
get out part two.
important.
You got to get part two out.
I don't know
We'll
if
give
I'll live
you
that long.
we'll give you a rest. We'll give you a break, but you got to get us part two. You have to get us part two. So yeah, so I took a couple of notes, but I wasn't able to finish the entire book by the time of today. But I think that's okay because, again, we're just gonna go with the flow, and the flow is going to be pretty easy to go with. I know what I want to talk to you about, but I'm going to start out with this book. How many pages is it?
Well, we cheated actually. If you include the introduction and the forward, it's more numbered pages than appear. The numbered pages are 430 something.
430 something pages. I had on here in I believe it was December. I'm beginning to forget. If not, no, December was November. I had on here Dr. Ashley Farmer, and she has done a biography of Queen Mother Moore,
Right.
someone who stretches through almost 100 years of our history. And that was also a mighty thick book. It's just so much history. And I when I first went off to college, I was actually a communications major. I had actually majored in telecommunications in high school. I had set out to major in communications when I got to Howard. And when I got to Howard, there was just so much going on and happening. My consciousness expanded. And I really was like, I want to know not only who has been lying to me, I want to know the exact lies they've told and pinpoint where the truth has been buried. So I switched to history as my major. I have since returned to communications journalism, but I like history. Unlike a lot of people, I like history because you're able to go back and find things. Malcolm X said, of all our studies, history is most qualified to reward our research. I don't know how many people took him up on that. There are just so many jewels you can find when you go back in history. And as we are here in 2026 with this orange menace and his regime just running amok, one of the things that has been said about your book, this memoir of only 20 years, is that it contains so many gems, so many lessons from history for this younger generation. So let me, first of all, thank you for that again, for sharing that. But again, let's talk about some of the things that we're able to take away from this book. So it's 20 years, but we're going back about 60, a little bit over 60 years, like you say, to 1962. This is the early years of the Cuban Revolution and what's happening, how it's affecting the United States and how it's affecting countries elsewhere.
And how it was affecting us.
Hmm. How it was
I
affecting
mean,
us. And
the
and you were a young student at the time at Cornell University, right?
right, but before then, um, I was kind of a beatnik in New York, and I spent a
Hmm.
lot of time in Greenwich Village.
Hmm.
And when I was still in high school, which is this story actually is not in the book,
Hmm.
um, I was wandering through bookstores, which there were many of, and I found a pamphlet by someone I had never heard of. The pamphlet was called "History Will Absolve Me,"
Hmm.
and of course, the author was Fidel Castro. And I think I was a junior or a senior in high school at the time, and I read it, and it just set me on a path of thinking about justice, injustice, revolution, and who is this guy who just doesn't give a shit about what he says in court, and he's facing this long sentence. And um, so from then on, I paid a lot of attention to the Cuban Revolution. In the early days at Cornell, we had something called the Fair Play for Cuba Committee,
Hmm.
and Amiri Baraka, who at the time we knew as Leroy Jones, had been to Cuba, I believe, in '62, and he spoke at campus about it. He brought us the news, and
Hmm.
that's how we set up this committee, which, of course, had a picket line when the Bay of Pigs was invaded. The United States did something like they tried to do in Venezuela recently. They raised an army of Cuban exiles and invaded the island and expected a huge uprising to welcome them. And of course, it didn't happen. And they were roundly defeated.
Hmm.
Um, so we were very inspired by the Cuban Revolution.
I
And
believe Robert and Mabel Williams were part of the Fair Play for Cuba committee in Michigan.
right,
Hmm.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So now you're a student at Cornell University. Your consciousness has been expanded and is continually expanding, but you're a student.
But also, I in a lot of ways, I don't think my consciousness was expanded so much by school
Oh, no, no,
as
no. I
by,
wasn't saying at school, but I'm saying while you're there.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, while you're there. And before we get into the revolutionary aspects, I want to go back to something very, very personal. As you know, I helped Deborah Jones write her book,
Hmm.
which I forgot the name of yesterday, but it's I've forgotten it again today. Anyway, we were I can't remember the name of the book, but anyway, Deborah Jones is the woman who testified against Maulana Karenga in 1970, and it resulted in his going to prison. Maulana Karenga of the US organization and one of the founders of Kwanzaa. Um, what we stood for. I can see the comma of I can see the cover of the book clearly. I had no idea what the name of was the book that I helped co-author. It's called What We Stood For: The Story of a Revolutionary Black Woman. And in listening to Deborah's story, I was struck by some of the similarities of one of my elder comrade sister friends. Her name is Taliba Shakir. Taliba joined the Black Panther Party in 1968. She was 16 years old under the leadership of Bunchy Carter. So she actually worked with and knew Bunchy at that time. And being growing up as black girls in LA, I was struck by the similarities of their stories, even though their trajectories took one to the Panthers and one to the US organization. You, as a young girl, young woman, early 1960s, abortion was illegal, and you found yourself in a relationship and you had a pregnancy scare,
Hmm.
and you had to navigate attempting to find a way to have an illegal abortion. And just the navigation of that sounded scary to me. Even though
Hmm.
it was a scare, a pregnancy scare, you weren't pregnant, but just your retelling of having to find someone through the grapevine and find them out and ask them information about someone who could perform the procedure and how that person was moving in the world. It was really scary. It sounds really scary.
Well, I think that one thing you started out by talking about history, and
Mhm,
the context of those days is it may be hard for people to imagine. I
mhm,
mean, in this, it was several years not just before abortion was legalized, but it was several years ahead of this time when women could get a credit card without a man's permission and signature. Um, During this time, basically, the only jobs legally, I mean, discrimination, it was legal discrimination. An educated woman could get a job as a teacher or a nurse.
mhm,
Um, and um, we had curfew. We had to be on weekday nights. We had to be in the dorm by 10 o'clock at night. Of course, the dorms were separate. There were no co-ed dorms.
well, is that all students or just the female students
The female students
had to be in?
had to be in by 10 at weekday. I think Friday, I'm not sure I'm remembering correctly, but I think Friday was something like 12 and Saturday was something like 1.
Mhm,
Um, but the interesting thing is that the only way they could tell if you were late is if you signed out in the first place. So some of us didn't sign out.
right.
And the only way we would get caught then is if there was a fire drill. And some of us, we rotated and volunteered to be fire marshals, so we would get the information about fire drills in advance
Mhm.
so that we could warn people, you better sign out tonight if you're planning to be out. Because,
Okay.
so my point is that the restrictions created a level of rebelliousness in
Mhm,
itself, at least among some of us. But
mhm.
yeah.
Okay. Now, it's also while you're a student, what is it called today? Study abroad. They call it study abroad. You had an opportunity to actually go to Peru while you were a student and do field work. And you write in the book, this was my introduction to third world poverty, the real world consequence of the imperial plunder we left wing students at Cornell had often discussed. Am I pronouncing this correctly? Juarez?
Waras.
Juarez. In Juarez, the sight of barefoot, half naked children with their legs swollen and eyes sunken invariably left me on the verge of tears. My privilege in the face of the daily grind of misery all around me made me feel worse. I had to help, but I had no idea how. Lack of sleep and altitude sickness left me dizzy, often with nausea that only chocolate bars temporarily remedied. Then I felt guilty about eating chocolate while so many children starved.
One thing I wanted to mention, because Cornell has such a terrible reputation these days, and um, within Cornell there are state supported schools that were
Mhm,
tuition free. One of them was called the School of Industrial and Labor Relations.
mhm,
My parents couldn't afford the tuition, and so I went to study industrial labor relations. It was supposed to be equally divided between business perspective and labor perspective.
mhm,
And so that's where I started to learn about capitalism and labor unions and workers' struggles and this sort of thing. The program I went um, to get to Peru, my job was to study the political role of trade unions in
mhm,
Peru. So that was my project.
mhm.
Um, I think I lost track of the question you were asking me
No,
about.
I was just talking about your experience. This is your initial experience
Yeah.
when you get to Peru. You go on to say, but now as I navigated the alleys of Juarez, the constant need to recalibrate my assumptions about normality disoriented and sometimes frightened me. Rafael, my host, had told me that the local police had a history of rounding up indigenas, and shooting them, while not a judge or politician lifted a finger to punish them. Yet when I passed a Guardia Civil on the streets of Juarez, he smiled and touched his hat in deference to me. I wanted to scream, "You murderer!" I trembled from the thought that I could get away with venting my anger when a Quechua speaking indigena might die for it. I was only dimly aware of reports of the daily humiliations and horrors endured by Black people in the United States at the hands of police at that time. When upset, I often lit up a cigarette. Yet in Peru, I knew not to light up a cigarette in public. So you've gone over to Peru, you're studying trade unions, you're involved in worker struggle. This is your introduction to the ravages of capitalism. You're seeing how the indigenous people live and are treated. What do you mean you knew not to lit up a cigarette in public?
Oh, a woman who smoked in public was a whore. Could be arrested.
Make it plain, make it plain. Be arrested in
Yeah,
Peru.
yeah, yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. So
I mean, by the way, that was that was true in the year before. I didn't even bother writing about this. The year before the summer I was in Peru, I got a job in a factory in Spain when it was still ruled by Franco, the fascist dictator,
mhm,
and the same was true there.
mhm, mhm. Well, you left that part out, but okay. So now you're in Peru. You're seeing what it's like as part of this program through the university, and you meet a man who's over the trade union, over one of the unions there, but he's also a grassroots organizer and a revolutionary. Is that Raphael?
No, that's Carlos Valenzuela.
Carlos, yeah. So you talk about, actually, you, if my memory serves me correctly, you weren't able to attend many meetings of the clandestine organization that was organizing in Peru at the time. Is that correct? He told you about it, but you weren't able to attend the meetings.
No, I did attend. I didn't always understand what was going on.
Okay. But at a certain point, you had to leave Peru. You come back to the US and you want to make plans to return to Peru, but two things happen. And they're not necessarily in order, but I'm hoping you can share with our audience about this because this is also something that struck me about the history of the treatment of women in the US. On the one hand, the clandestine organization that Carlos is a part of becomes decimated. Everyone is attacked. They are attacked, and everyone is killed. Again, there's a timeline issue there that I'm skipping. But what I want to talk about is you have come back now with this fervor to assist in this revolutionary process, but it is not well received by your family.
Um, that's a, that's an interpretation of the
I
text.
want you to expound on that for our
But
audience.
the way I remember it is that Carlos,
Mhm,
I was having a relationship with him. I initially met him because it was part of my job to interview as many trade union leaders as I could, and he was one
mhm,
of the people I interviewed.
mhm,
And and in the course of interviewing him, I learned everything there was, not everything there was to know, but everything I could know about Peruvian history, Mariátegui, the history of peasant and indigenous struggles, etc. And he was part of this organization that had been inspired by Cuban revolution, like most
mhm,
guerrilla movements in Latin America were, and he was part of a group that was planning to begin the I'm sorry, the Peruvian Revolution in the Sierra, where most of the Indian communities were, and have it moved to the cities or to the coast once it gathered strength. Um, and and I was going to be the name of that chapter is Tanya without Tanya. Tanya was the pseudonym for this woman who assisted Che in Bolivia,
mhm,
where she was supposed to be an urban liaison, funneling support, resources, and so on from the city to Che in the countryside. So that was the role I was going to assume. By
mhm,
returning to Peru
mhm,
after I went back to the States to raise money for them and graduate, because I only had a semester left to graduate, and they thought I would be a lot more useful with a degree than without a degree.
mhm,
And then basically, I had what we would call a mental crack up or a breakdown, or what appeared to be that, um, as I arrived back in the States. Um, and I was incarcerated in a mental hospital for a little more than 6, 7 months, I think. I'm not sure of the, I was never
mhm,
quite sure of the dates. Um, had shock treatment, all kinds of shock treatment. Um, And when I was finally allowed to leave, I was told that the conditions of my release, basically, at least this is how I experienced it, was not to be involved in politics and not to have any sex, because these were the things that, quote, upset me. Um, so I'm not sure if that's the story you're referring to, but that's the
Absolutely.
story. That's the story of that chapter. And, those early chapters basically are trying to show how uh, an ordinary white North American woman could end up going from being a liberal, which I basically was, and sort of a social rebel, to developing an anti-imperialist consciousness and revolutionary commitment. Um, and a lot of that had to do with what I personally experienced that made me very, very angry and alienated from this so-called system.
Hmm.
And I mean that's and also I think I'm trying to show how a lot of these experiences with, quote, normal experiences. I mean, not everybody goes to Peru,
Hmm.
but everybody's had confrontations with the system, especially patriarchy in my case, and um, capitalism.
Hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. I was thinking about how Deborah Jones, her father, had been incarcerated for selling marijuana,
Mm,
and so he was eventually released and returned to the family, but he was gone for maybe 5, 8 years, and so she's here with her two younger sisters and her mom, and struggling to help her mother, who has only been a housewife at this point, and now her mom has to get a job, and she's like 14, 15 years old. The weight of it begins to take its toll on her, so she starts running away.
mm-hmm,
And so her mom, being concerned that she's running away, has her sent to juvenile hall.
mm-hmm.
And her mom is like, well, at least now I know where you are. And when
That's
Liba joined the Panther Party, because her mother thought she was a part of a cult, had her sent to juvenile hall. She's 16, 17 years old.
and my parents sent me to a mental
Her parents sent
hospital.
her to a mental institution.
It's very, I, yeah, thank you for noticing that.
Um, and, I have never had, unlike what other people think of me, I have never had any experience with mental illness. I've never been committed to a mental institution. But when I read that chapter, I immediately thought to myself, oh, I know about electric shock therapy because I saw One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest when I was younger
Hmm.
with Jack Nicholson. And then there's this other film, I can't remember the name of the film, but Angelina Jolie is in it. And she's portraying a woman whose son has been kidnapped. And the authority, it was one of those films that gives you an incredible look at how white women in particular are treated. We know how black women, we live it, so we know how we've been treated. But
Hmm.
when you get to see what patriarchy does to white women, what white cishet patriarchy does to white women, the authorities bring her some other little boy
Mm.
and they try to pass him off as their son. She's like, I know my son. This is not my son. So because she keeps raising a ruckus, what do? Have her committed to a mental institution.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. There's a nice ending to that chapter, however,
Yes. Hmm.
that you might have noticed. I
Yeah.
don't know if you want me to talk
Oh,
about that or
absolutely.
not.
Please, please.
So, so I have to say, later on, it took many years before I understood that I had been totally misdiagnosed
Well,
and that.
actually, wait a minute. Yeah, before we get to that,
Yeah.
Those electric shock treatments
Yeah.
affected your memory,
Yes.
affected even your memories of Peru
Yeah.
and the revolutionary plans you had set in motion.
Oh, yeah. No, well, somehow I think I had decided that my incarceration in the mental hospital, in the beginning anyway, was a CIA plot.
Hmm.
And they were trying to find out information about Carlos and his comrades, and I wasn't going to speak, or I was going to resist. And I actually got the reputation in the hospital for being quite destructive, and spent most of my early days, if not in shock treatment, in restraints.
Hmm.
Um,
But you
you
said
know,
there's a happy ending, though.
yeah.
Hmm.
So after a while, I guess due to the shock treatments, there was not much resistance, and gradually I was allowed privileges, and when and the privileges included things like having a knife to cut your meat, or having being allowed to use tampons instead of having a nurse install your sanitary napkin and that sort of thing. So what I'm trying to say is, whatever I had of an identity and a self-esteem was, you know, below the basement. Um, as I was allowed to have privileges, one of those privileges was visitors. And one of those visitors was a prior boyfriend of mine whose name was Danny Schechter. Some people may be familiar with him.
Yeah,
He became a filmmaker and also an anti-apartheid worker,
yeah.
um,
Hmm.
and uh, it worked for the actually worked for the underground, the anti-apartheid underground in London, and personally knew Mandela.
Hmm.
Anyway, he started visiting me, and he knew me as a different person. He knew me as um, somebody who was the co-founder of the Cornell SDS chapter,
Hmm.
Students for a Democratic Society. So he um, he basically threw me a lifeline and helped me to recover,
Your memories,
not only memories, but just my sense of being
sanity.
an adult who could function in the world.
Hmm.
And the first weekend that I was out, well, not the first weekend I was out, but the first weekend I was allowed to be on my own, he had been active in this campaign in Harlem called No Rents for Rats. And it was a rent control.
Oh
It
God.
was a rent control campaign that Malcolm X was involved with.
Right.
He was, and he took me to a meeting and introduced me to Malcolm after the meeting was over. And I'll let you buy the book to know what that. No, I should. That's too opportunistic.
Well,
uh,
not necessarily.
anyway, Malcolm gave me a lot of encouragement that that
Hmm.
that I wouldn't say was decisive or anything, but it was just really helpful to me and important to me in recovering my life.
In the, I'm, I think it was in the 90s. In the 90s, just before Mandela, well, a few years before Mandela was released from prison. I don't remember how, I don't know who, I don't know why, but I came across a program called South Africa Now.
Mhm.
And
That was Danny's program, wasn't it?
all praises to Danny Schechter. These were actual, this was nothing filtered. There was no, these were black South Africans doing a news program about what was happening in South Africa at the time. At the time, there was a blackout. Nothing, almost nothing could get out of South Africa because of the white apartheid, the settler colonial white minority apartheid government. And I don't remember how, but I came across this program called South Africa Now that was putting out this information on a consistent basis. And I watched it as consistently as I possibly could. Danny Schechter, yes, Danny Schechter, the news
News
dissector.
dissector.
I started to say, what was it? Not the media assassin, that's a public enemy. But Danny Schechter, the news dissector, that was something he had his hands all over. Just for that alone, all praises to Danny Schechter. But when I came across that name in your book, seeing how he had provided that lifeline for you, that wow, just wow, that was an incredible person, an incredible person. South Africa now is, I'm almost tearing up thinking about it.
Mhm.
Such a wonderful program. So
By
yeah.
the way, by the way, Danny passed quite a while ago of pancreatic cancer at a
Mhm.
very young age.
Mhm. But now going back to this, before we get into your experiences with Vietnam and the Black Liberation Movement, just real quick, the nerve of this doctor at this mental institution saying to you, "Okay, you can go home now, but you can't have sex or get involved in politics." I okay, just the absolute gall, the nerve, what we would call the caucasity of this
Mm.
white man telling you that. But now, okay, you're in a mental institution. I I don't know if I should say this, but I kind of understand why they don't want you to have a knife or I kind of understand that. Why they wouldn't want anybody, but what's the deal with the tampons? What is that about?
I have no. I never understood that. Oh, I never understood that. I mean, I could
What was the
only.
stated reason?
They don't give reasons. It's just rules.
It's all an attempt to control every aspect of your being, which is what institutions do.
Right.
That's just crazy. That I know that might be an ableist term. What these people in these institutions have done to other people, what this system does to people is ridiculous. It is absolutely ridiculous. Hold on. They created hysteria to keep females out of politics and so that they can control their sexual nature. I don't doubt it. I do not doubt it. There's so much going on. But all right, let me you've met Malcolm X. We know that Malcolm is assassinated in 65 and from there on, there's the timeline, the trajectory, the ending of the quote unquote nonviolent phase of the civil rights movement, moving towards Black Power, the Black Panthers, other liberation formations. But also at this time, 1965 in particular, the United States has engaged in this war in Southeast Asia, this war that they're not calling war, in Vietnam. And Lyndon Johnson is president at the time. And between 65 and I guess between 65 and 75, you're doing work around the Black Liberation Movement, the beginnings of the women's movement, and support for Vietnam. Can you talk about some of those experiences for us?
Well, in some ways, the, the one that I'll start with 64, actually, with the election campaign for Lyndon Baines Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
And during that election campaign, SDS had a button that said part of the way with LBJ.
Mm-hmm.
And our idea was he was the peace candidate. He campaigned on a platform of peace, whereas this, super right wing classic, uh, uh, John Birch Society, who that was sort of the closest equivalent, I guess, to, oh, I don't know, everybody's a member of the John, everybody, super right wing organization. So he was the candidate of the John Birch Society, Goldwater, and he promised to bomb Vietnam into the Stone Age during his campaign. But Johnson was going to bring peace and didn't want to bomb at all.
Mm-hmm.
So our part of the way with LBJ idea was, well, we understood he was a Dixiecrat and he was responsible for keeping Fannie Lou Hamer from um, the Fannie Lou Hamer had a Freedom Democratic Party, was a spokesperson
Mm-hmm.
for a major black initiative in the South to basically not only get the right to vote, but end the rule of the Dixiecrats, the right
Mm-hmm.
wing of the Democratic Party.
Mm-hmm.
And Johnson opposed that. So we weren't going to go all the way with Johnson by any means. We were going to go part of the way, the
Yeah.
anti-war way. Well,
Mm-hmm.
that was that was my lesson, indelible lesson about electoral politics, because the same peace candidate ended up sending 500,000 troops to Vietnam within 2 years of his election.
500,000.
500,000, right?
5,000 people. Jesus.
And frankly, I have never voted in a. I've never participated in electoral politics since then.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that was the lesson that some people had later on with various Democratic Party candidates, in terms of disappointment and needing that level of betrayal to understand that the system doesn't
Mm-hmm.
work. Although some people never learn that lesson. But,
Right. Right.
so that was that. I think that was one one aspect of that education. Um, the other aspect was I went to Berkeley for graduate school,
Mm-hmm.
and and I arrived in Berkeley in the winter of '65. I was a semester late because I made up the year I lost in the mental hospital in a semester, and wanted to. So I ended up in the winter, which was a few months after the free speech movement. And I don't know how familiar people are with this history. It seemed really major at the time. It was,
Mm-hmm.
uh, in some ways, the defining event of that ushered in the student rebellions and uprisings and movements of the 60s and 70s, when 800 people got arrested. But I got there late. I didn't get there till February,
Mm-hmm.
and that was in December. But all the offspring of the free speech movement was still in 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 full swing. A lot of the leadership of that movement came out of SNCC. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of it, it wasn't until 1966 that SNCC told people we can take care of ourselves. We don't want white people anymore. But before then, uh, there were a number of white people who went south, and a lot of them learned those lessons and came north. And
Mm-hmm.
some of them were my comrades and teachers, and as well as um, this guy named Hardy Fry, who was a black SNCC veteran, and we had a well, I was recruited by them to work on this newspaper that had started as a Friends of SNCC newsletter. It was
Mm-hmm.
called The Movement. I can talk a little bit about that later, or this, but um, the earliest lessons from them came when um, there were groups on campus that were weekly picketing in Oakland against a fairly high end bougie white restaurant called the Seawolf.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that, of course, everybody who ate there was white, and the black people, and at the time, black people were huge majority of the population of Oakland, and they couldn't get jobs except as dishwashers there. They couldn't get good, well-paying jobs in the front of the house or anywhere, and so we picketed and really destroyed their business until they hired. And uh, somebody, and another thing that we did that was directly inspired and led in a way by SNCC was the anti-draft movement. And I raise these two things because they were actions that were not symbolic. They actually interfered with the operation and of whether it was the business or the government, and until our demands were met. So there was sort of a split in the anti-Vietnam War movement. Well, more than one split, but of course, but but there was a lot of people who were only concerned with quote bringing the troops home.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't really give a shit about the Vietnamese or national liberation struggle or anything like that. And then there were those of us who learned after a couple of years of watching what was going on there and paying attention to what they were saying to support the national liberation struggle. One of the ways we did that was by actively interfering with the draft.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the only way you get a 500,000 troops to a place where a lot of people are dying is with a draft. It wasn't a volunteer army by any means, and I think the loss. Well, I'm getting into analysis of why the loss, and it was that loss. Um, Not just the deaths, I think, of 50,000 50,000 GIs, but also um, the whole breakdown of discipline. I mean, the U.S. Army was destroyed,
Mm-hmm.
and not just because the Vietnamese were killing them, but black people in the army who were much higher percentage of draftees proportionally, and probably towards the end, in absolute numbers. Um, Number one, they knew what was going on in the States in terms of all the urban uprisings, and they knew about the Black Panther Party, and they knew about SNCC, and 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 so there was enormous amount of rebellion, what they called in country in Vietnam, and officers were being fragged meaning having fragmentation bombs thrown at them by their own troops.
Yay.
uh, that sort of thing. So that, um, um, I keep on jumping ahead and then forgetting what the question. eh,
Well, let
Oh,
me.
I know the direct action and the interference. So what we did was there were coffee houses, for example, that we set up near every army base, and those coffee houses, in addition to providing coffee and news and lots of pamphlets and stuff, were counseling centers to help people filed conscientious objector status to get out after they were drafted, or to go AWOL, um, you know, to help people get out once they were in. So there were the
Mm-hmm.
coffee houses. Then there was an enormous amount of anti-draft work even before people got in to help them not be taken.
Mm-hmm.
And um, and then the first really, and this is described a little in the book, direct action we took was to try to stop the troop trains, and that essentially became kind of symbolic because we didn't have any success in stopping. Well, we did. They had to be rerouted, so
Mm-hmm.
they were slowed down a little bit, but it was that level of action and militancy
Disruption.
in yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'm going to skip because I told you I wasn't going to keep you long, and we've been here
Oh
going on an
yeah, it's
hour.
an
I'm not supposed to keep you long. Out of this pool, out of this context, starting with students, I'm going to start with Students for Democratic Society. There's splits in SDS. There's white students working with SNCC who come north before there's the rumblings in SNCC that whites should leave. Whites leave afterwards. There's the Vietnam War. There's splits or tensions within the anti-war movement. Out of all of this, we get a group of white men and women who commit themselves to anti-imperialism. These are their formative stages. Now, you said your book covers a 20-year period going up to 1982, but many of the people that you have been in struggle with, comradeship with, these are people who become weathermen, Weather Underground, John Brown Anti-Klan Society, Prairie Fire Organizing Committee, May 19th Collective, Madam Ben Graphics Collective. These are collectives or entities of white people committed to anti-imperialism, and their commitment is not just anti-imperialism in far off places like Peru or Chile or Cuba, but it's committed to anti-imperialism in Atlanta, in Newark, in New York, in Chicago, and Oakland. Can you talk about that period, that formative
in 6 minutes or 4 minutes.
Take
Yeah.
your time.
No, seriously, maybe we could narrow it a little bit.
You do your thing. We don't have to end it precisely in 6 minutes, but soon.
Well, we didn't separate what was happening overseas, whether it was Cuba or Southern Africa or Vietnam. We didn't separate that from what was happening here.
Mhm,
Um, by 66, 67, the Black Panther Party was talking about imperialism and talking about black people being an internal colony
mhm,
of the United States. Um, and that it wasn't just the Black Panther Party, but the Panther
mhm,
Party was what personally I was closest to because I was here in the Bay Area
mhm,
and crossed paths and worked directly in some ways with the Panther Party. Um, so there was, and then there was all the upheaval in Europe. Um, in 1968, there was the French students had this uprising that nearly took over the country.
mhm,
Similar kinds of stuff was happening in Germany and in Japan, and the Bader Meinhof gang in Germany and Japan. And me personally, I was working at the Movement newspaper. I was one of the editors of the Movement newspaper, which by then had become uh, two things. It was sort of a liaison between the Black movement, or first SNCC, then later the Panther Party,
Mm-hmm.
and the so called New Left, or SDS. Um, and we became kind of a clearinghouse for all this activity, and a sort of neutral ground in a way, because there were a lot of factions.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so personally, um, I was I knew a lot of the people who were involved in this stuff. They Our house was kind of a way station when they came to the Bay Area, and that sort of thing. But aside from that, the main thing, particularly because of the urban uprisings here, um, as well as the liberation struggles in southern Africa and so on, and Che Guevara issuing this call to create two, three, many Vietnams,
Mm-hmm.
um, which meant bring the war home.
Mm-hmm.
And we were sure we were going to win this war. And I think this is very important to understand our frame of mind at the time. And in some ways, I think there's an important political point here. Because we were so convinced that we were going to win, and we were going to win soon, we thought we'd win in 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, people were willing to sacrifice. And, you know, I've had discussions with, for example, a comrade of both of ours, Kali Akuno,
Mm-hmm.
once when we were talking about reformism, and I remember him saying, well, reformists are people who've given up on revolution. And we were the opposite of that. We
Mm-hmm.
we had not given up, and we would never give up. And personally still have not given up. But but we thought we were going to win right away. So the level of willingness to give up our homes, our safety, primarily our safety. It wasn't like any of us were that, well, there were a few children of rich people in the organization, but um, most of us didn't have any level of real material comfort. But we did have a level of safety, or a level of safety we were about to give up.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's important to understand that as the um, ideological and context, not and also experiential context for our willingness to take that kind of risk, and well, to risk our lives.
Mm-hmm.
um and uh it didn't seem crazy, it didn't seem abnormal at the time.
Mm-hmm.
um I'm trying to figure out where to go next with your question.
Don't worry about it. I have arthritis. I can only sit for so long
Yeah.
before Mr. Arthritis begins to knock on the door and I have to answer the door. We're talking with Arlene Eisen about her memoir that has just been published by Iskra Books, In the Worldwide Family of Militant Women. You just had a book signing panel discussion over the weekend, the past Friday in Oakland, California. That is the poster of the cover of the book behind you, behind Arlene.
Oh wait, you can't see it if I do that.
Why don't we? Yeah, let's see the cover of the book, Arlene. um, the last thing I want to ask you, where is it at? So again, I'm a person who likes history. I enjoy history. I don't mind going back to find the kernels. I want to hear the stories. I want to know what happened. I want to know what took place. I want to get the kernels and the nuance. For those watching and for those who are going to like and share and subscribe, what are the lessons for young activists today you would like for them to take from your book?
The title of the book is In the Worldwide Family of Militant Women.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and because I didn't want to scare people off by saying we need an anti-imperialist women's movement,
Mm-hmm.
um, which is really one of my main was one of my main purposes then, and is still my main purpose. So, and more than movement, we need organization. Movements are not necessarily always very well or permanently organized, and particularly now, um, where we see, well, Vietnam was a similar period today, where you saw, for example, um, two issues being the nexus of male supremacy, white supremacy, and imperialism. And one of those was rape, and
Mm-hmm.
the other of those was what we could call forced breeding, um, of no denial of abortion, forced marriage, that sort of thing. And these are two institutions or two forms of oppression, um, where it becomes particularly urgent not to relegate the issue to bourgeois feminists or feminists who uh, only want a seat at the white man's table, because it's that white man's table that's the source of those problems. And unfortunately, um, the, those women have given the women's movement in general, and particularly the white women's movement, such a bad name,
Mm-hmm.
rightly so, that nobody wants to even mention it or talk about it, or and that's a problem too. Um, it's a failure of analysis and it's a failure of practice. And I see today, I mean, you're one of the few anti imperialist women's podcasters. I mean, there are hardly any. Yeah, and I can't tell you the number of women who've read this book, for example, who've told me, and without, before it was even, published, who who I was debating whether to include parts of the ending that have to do with my own abuse, physical abuse at the hands of a comrade, and um, so many women told me that they experienced that today, and it shocked me, frankly, that all this stuff is still going on. It shouldn't shock me because a Marxist analysis would tell you if you haven't changed the material conditions, nothing else is going to change, and it
Mm-hmm.
hasn't. And so, um, I hope the story will be interesting enough to people to read, and more interesting than reading a series of position papers or theoretical arguments, and be a kind of motivation to look at their own lives and how how taking political action and organization can is the only way to survive that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Arlene Eisen, thank you so much for
Thank
being
you.
on Root Work today. Thank you for your life. Thank you for your example. Thank you for writing this book. And thank you for being on Root Work today.
Thank you for inviting me and asking fun, good, wonderful questions.
You're
Oh,
very welcome.
I have arthritis too, so I'm glad
All right,
we
so us two
can get
arthritic
up and
ladies need to get
stretch.
up out of here. Yeah, we got to get up
Okay.
out of here. All right, y'all. That's going to be it for us as usual. I appreciate you hanging out with us. Please like, share, and subscribe if you have not done so already. I told you to do that in the beginning in case you forgot or got mad. But I'm going to remind you again, like this video, share the link, subscribe to Rootwork, and subscribe to Black Liberation Media. Please support us with the Patreon, which is down at the bottom of the screen. That's my personal Cash App and Venmo if you want to support a bald-headed sister out here trying to do some work. Appreciate everything that you all have done. Just your presence here helps us out. So again, thank you to Arlene Eisen. Thank you to all of you. We are going to get up out of here. We're going to return you to your afternoon. You all stay safe, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.
Black Liberation Media is a collective of Black and African organizers, journalists, academics, and media personalities serving Black and African masses seeking to further grow in their understanding of themselves, their histories, and the African world through entertainment and news. Please continue to like, subscribe, and donate to the channel so we can further serve you and liberate our people. You can also go to blkliberationmedia.org, get some merchandise, and also become a Patreon member and a member from the YouTube. Please do what you can, share, and show your love as we will show ours for you. Black Liberation Media.